Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your shortcut to understanding some pretty complex global issues. And today, wow, we're diving into a story that's incredibly dramatic and frankly, quite heartbreaking. It's the transformation of Venezuela. It was once seen as this beacon of prosperity in South America, sitting on the world's largest proven oil reserves. But it's just spiraled into, well, one of the worst peacetime economic collapses we've seen in modern history. We're talking about immense suffering, hyperinflation that's hard to fathom, political chaos, and a huge mass exodus of its people. So our mission today is to really unpack the challenges Venezuela is facing. We want to dig into the root causes and maybe explore some potential paths to recovery, though they look incredibly difficult. And we're drawing all this directly from a whole stack of recent reports and analyses, basically giving you the key insights without you having to read them all.
Yeah, and when you say catastrophic collapse, the numbers really just hit you. I mean, think about this. By 2021, something like 95% of Venezuelans were living in poverty. And get this, 77% were in extreme poverty. That's the highest rate anywhere in the Americas. The economy itself, it shrank by a massive 80% just between 2014 and 2021. That's the kind of contraction you usually only see in, like, war zones. And then there's the human displacement. Since 2014, over 7.8 million Venezuelans have fled. It's the biggest displacement crisis in Latin America's history. These aren't just numbers on a page, you know. They represent real people, immense suffering, lives completely upended. It's hard to fully grasp the scale.
Those figures are truly stark. Okay, so with that context, let's dig a bit deeper into how this economic collapse actually worked. Starting with that hyperinflation you mentioned, it sounds almost theoretical, but what did that actually mean for people day to day? Can you paint a picture for us?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, imagine this. You get your paycheck for the week, and maybe before you can even spend it, it's lost half its value. That was the reality. Hyperinflation peaked at an incredible 9,500% in 2019.
9,500%.
Yeah. Your money was essentially worthless almost as soon as you got it, hours sometimes. Even by 2023, it was still really high, around 190% annually. The national currency, the bolivar, just became unusable. People stopped accepting it. And because of that, formal jobs just evaporated. So many people were pushed into the informal economy, maybe selling things on the street or just bartering, trading goods for services just to get by. Honestly, survival itself became a full-time occupation.
Wow. Just survival as a job. And the humanitarian cost, as you said, is just immense. Beyond those big numbers, like the 7.8 million who left, what does that look like for individuals, for those who fled and for those who had to stay behind?
Right, that's 7.8 million. That's like a quarter of the entire population.
Yeah.
Gone. And many take these incredibly dangerous routes. You hear about the Darien Gap, that dense, lawless jungle between Colombia and Panama.
Yeah, I've read about that. Horrifying conditions.
Exactly. People risk everything. Violence, disease, smugglers, you name it, just trying to reach safety or opportunity somewhere else. And the neighboring countries are struggling. Colombia's taken in nearly 3 million people. Peru, about 1.5 million. It puts enormous strain on their resources, their schools, their healthcare. And for the people still in Venezuela, life is this constant battle. Severe shortages of everything, food, medicine, even basics like running water. There was a UNICEF report, I think from 2024, saying 7.6 million people inside Venezuela need humanitarian help. And things like 70% don't have regular access to water or healthcare. A third of the population faces food insecurity. So it's this multi-layered crisis hitting people inside and outside the country's borders.
Okay, so we've painted a pretty grim picture of the symptoms and the human cost. Now let's shift gears a bit and try to understand the why. What led to this? It sounds like a perfect storm of factors. And right at the center seems to be Venezuela's massive reliance on oil, right?
Absolutely central. Yeah. Oil was basically everything for government revenue. Nearly all of it, which, makes you incredibly vulnerable when prices swing.
So what happened when the market turned?
It was a total gut punch. Oil prices were around $100 a barrel in 2014. By 2016, they'd crashed to below $30.
Wow, that's a huge drop.
Huge. It basically cut off the country's main income stream overnight. But it wasn't just the price. Their own oil production collapsed, too. They used to produce around 3 million barrels a day back in 2000. By 2020, it was down to just 337,000 barrels.
337 from 3 million? What caused that?
Chronic underinvestment, basically, and terrible mismanagement of PDVSA, the state oil company. PDVSA used to be the engine of the economy, but billions that should have gone into maintenance, into new exploration, just disappeared or were wasted. Infrastructure crumbled.
And that mismanagement, it wasn't just PDVSA, was it? It sounds like government policies, first under Chavez and then Maduro, really compounded the problems. Tell us about Chavez's reforms. They were intended to help the poor, but how did they contribute to the collapse?
That's a really key point. Chavez brought in these socialist reforms, things like strict price controls on basic goods and taking over private companies, often without compensation. The idea was to make things affordable, but the effect was, well, it crippled the private sector.
How so?
Well, if you force businesses to sell goods for less than they cost to produce, they just stop producing, or they shut down altogether. So you got widespread shortages, empty shelves became normal, and Maduro largely continued these policies. Add in absolutely rampant corruption, siphoning off state funds, business confidence just evaporated, thousands of businesses closed. By 2017, you had inflation running at 50% a month.
50% a month. Unbelievable.
Yeah, and corruption was like this constant rock eating away at everything.
Okay, so we have internal factors like oil dependency, mismanagement, corruption. But then external pressures started to build too. Let's talk sanctions. The U.S. and the EU started imposing them around 2016. Why? And what did they target?
Right. The stated reasons were mainly human rights abuses and concerns about democratic backsliding, electoral fraud allegations against Maduro's government. The sanctions primarily targeted key figures in the government and, crucially, PDVSA, the oil company. They restricted access to international financial markets, making it harder to trade oil or get loans.
Now, this is a really debated point. Did the sanctions actually hurt the regime, or did they end up hurting the people more? And maybe even give the government a scapegoat?
Yeah, it's incredibly complex and politically charged. There's no easy answer. One side argues that, okay, the crisis started before the major sanctions hit, but the sanctions prevented any chance of recovery when oil prices ticked up a bit in 2017-18. They say sanctions worsened oil production cuts, made shortages worse, and indirectly contributed to suffering.
Okay, that's one view. What's the counter-argument?
The other side says the regime uses sanctions as a convenient excuse to deflect blame from their own disastrous policies and corruption. They argue the collapse was well underway regardless, and sanctions were a necessary response to authoritarianism. Both arguments have data points they can cite, making it really hard to definitively say what the exact impact was versus the impact of internal policies.
And that political instability you mentioned, the erosion of democracy, that seems woven into everything. Maduro's government has really clamped down, hasn't it? How does that manifest itself?
Oh, completely. We've seen a systematic dismantling of democratic checks and balances. Elections are widely seen as manipulated. Dissent is repressed, often violently. Look at the 2024 presidential election. Serious fraud allegations surfaced, leading the U.S. to actually reimpose some sanctions that had been temporarily eased because Maduro apparently didn't stick to promises about fairer conditions.
So this authoritarianism, it basically kills any chance for real dialogue or reform from within.
Pretty much. It stifles opposition, makes it incredibly hard for alternative voices to emerge or organize, and complicates any effort by the international community to help broker a solution. Change becomes very difficult when power is held so tightly and dissent isn't tolerated.
And the fallout from all this, it doesn't just stay within Venezuela's borders, does it? It spills over significantly. Talk about the regional impact. That mass exodus must be putting incredible strain on neighboring countries.
Immense strain. You mentioned Colombia and Peru, but also Ecuador, Brazil, Chile. They're all struggling to cope with millions of arrivals. Social services, healthcare, schools, job markets, they're overwhelmed. And that Darien Gap crossing figure you cited earlier, 800,000 in 2024 alone, that includes 160,000 children, a 40% jump from the year before. It's staggering.
And does this movement create other problems like instability?
Yes, unfortunately, large unregulated movements of people can be exploited by criminal groups. You see increases in instability and crime along border regions. It puts huge pressure on resources and security forces in those receiving countries.
And globally, Venezuela was a major oil player. Has its collapse affected world markets?
Definitely. Taking over 2 million barrels per day of production off the market compared to its peak. That certainly impacts global supply and prices, adding volatility. And, Venezuela's story serves as this really stark warning for other countries that rely heavily on just one resource, these petrostates. Diversify or risk ending up in a similar trap.
It also seems to have become a geopolitical chessboard piece.
Yeah, very much so. You have Russia and China stepping in to support Maduro politically and economically, sometimes counteracting Western pressure. Meanwhile, the U.S. and EU sanctions and their backing of opposition figures polarize the international response. It makes finding a unified, effective solution much harder. Venezuela's become a real flashpoint.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot of heavy, difficult news. But amidst all this, are there any glimmers of hope? Anything positive happening?
It's important to look for those, and yes, there are some. They might seem small against the scale of the crisis, but they're significant. You see resilience on the ground. grassroots movements, civil society groups like Fora Civico, they're working tirelessly. They're advocating for things like humanitarian access, fair wages, basic political freedoms. They haven't given up.
Are there specific examples of things working?
Yeah, there are practical initiatives too. Like World Vision is running training programs in places like Barinas. They're teaching entrepreneurs, small business owners, how to use tools like WhatsApp Business to rebuild local economies, even on a small scale. It shows this real determination at the community level to find ways forward, rebuilding from the bottom up.
And what about international help?
Yeah.
Is aid getting through?
There has been significant international effort. The EU has put in around $500 million since 2016. The U.S. over $856 million since 2017, much of it specifically for humanitarian aid. And remember, back in 2019, Maduro, after years of denying the crisis, actually allowed the Red Cross to bring in aid shipments. That was a rare but important concession. Plus, the UN has platforms like R4V, run by UNHCR and IOM, which are coordinating support for migrants across the region, legal help, health services, trying to help them integrate. And interestingly, there have been some sort of unexpected economic shifts within Venezuela, too.
Oh, like what?
Well, the government actually relaxed some of its strict price and currency controls back in 2019. And alongside that, you saw this spontaneous, widespread adoption of the U.S. dollar. People just started using it because the bolivar was useless.
Dollarization, right.
Exactly. Now, something like 95% of transactions happen in dollars. It's effectively bypassed the failed official currency. And these things, surprisingly, did manage to curb the absolute worst of the hyperinflation.
Did that translate into any actual economic growth?
Modestly, yes. There was actually some GDP growth, about 6.5% in 2022, maybe 4.4% in 2023. And oil production picked up a bit too, reaching around 850,000 barrels per day. That was partly due to the U.S. temporarily easing some sanctions in 2023, which allowed companies like Chevron to invest a bit more.
Okay, so some positive signs there. But how real are these gains? Are they sustainable or just, a temporary blip? Especially with that political situation still so tense and inflation still predicted to be high.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Or maybe the billion-dollar question for Venezuela. These gains are definitely fragile, very fragile. Like you said, inflation is still projected to be over 200% by 2025. Poverty is still cripplingly high, around 70%. So while there's been a slight uptick in activity, the fundamental problems of political instability, the deep structural economic issues haven't gone away. These gains could easily be reversed.
Right. And that brings us back to the obstacles. Despite those glimmers, the climb ahead looks incredibly steep. Politically, it seems like the biggest hurdle remains Maduro's grip on power. He has a military, foreign allies.
Absolutely. Maduro maintains control over the state institutions, the security forces are largely loyal, and allies like Russia and China provide crucial lifelines. Plus, electoral manipulation and repression continue. There were reports of, I think, 254 political prisoners back in 2021. It makes genuine political opposition incredibly difficult.
And the opposition itself seems to struggle to unite, doesn't it? Even with figures like Guaido or Maria Corina Machado gaining prominence at times.
It's been a major challenge. The opposition has often been fragmented, sometimes disagreeing on strategy, which makes it harder to present a unified front against a very entrenched regime.
And economically, beyond the fragility you mentioned.
Huge structural problems remain. The oil industry needs billions, maybe tens of billions, in investment just to get back to where it was. Corruption is still endemic, and that threat of sanctions snapping back always looms, creating uncertainty for any potential investors.
Then there are the social challenges. You mentioned the lack of trust earlier.
Yeah, that's huge. Only 5% interpersonal trust, according to some studies. That makes rebuilding social fabric incredibly hard. The healthcare system is decimated. You've got outbreaks of diseases we thought were under control. Measles, malaria, dengue, so many doctors and nurses have left the country. And education. It suffered massively. Millions of kids, like 6.9 million students, missed almost all schooling between 2020 and 2021 due to the crisis and then COVID. You risk creating a lost generation. So this really raises the crucial question, what on earth would it actually take for Venezuela to recover, given all this?
It sounds like it needs a massive coordinated effort on multiple fronts.
Exactly. It has to be multifaceted. First and foremost, you need political reconciliation. That means serious negotiations, like the ones attempted in Mexico. The goal has to be finding a path toward genuinely free and fair elections, restoring democratic institutions. And the international community needs to support a process led by Venezuelans, not impose solutions.
Okay. Political change is number one. What else?
Second, economic diversification. Venezuela absolutely has to move away from its over-reliance on oil. That means investing in other sectors, agriculture, technology, tourism, supporting small businesses, create a more resilient economy, and crucially, you need to strengthen institutions, fight corruption relentlessly, ensure rule of law, protect private property things that build confidence. That Foro Civico group actually put out a memo in 2022 calling for exactly these kinds of responsible policies.
Makes sense. And the immediate suffering.
Third, humanitarian aid needs to be scaled up and sustained. The UN says 7.6 million people still need help. That requires a massive coordinated effort from NGOs, UN agencies, donor governments. Getting aid to those who need it most is vital.
And fourth, you mentioned grassroots movements earlier.
Yes, empowering those grassroots efforts is key. Supporting local leaders, community organizations, especially women and young people who are often driving change. Providing them with resources, training, amplifying their voices. Rebuilding has to happen from the community level up, not just top down. And there's that interesting poll finding 65% of migrants saying they'd return if the opposition won power. That's a huge potential resource for rebuilding, if conditions allowed.
So putting it all together, but what's the takeaway here? Venezuela's situation is just incredibly complex. You've got this devastating economic collapse, severe political repression, and just vast human suffering. And it seems driven by this toxic mix of oil dependency, really bad government mismanagement, deep corruption, and then complicated further by international sanctions. Recovery seems possible, but only if all those root causes are tackled through dialogue, diversification, and sustained aid.
That sums it up well. The path forward is definitely long, it's uncertain, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Not just for Venezuela, but for the whole region, and even global stability to some extent. It really leaves you wondering, can Venezuela truly pull itself back from this? Is it possible? It feels like it hinges on the sustained collective will both inside the country and from the international community.
And that's where we want to bring you, our listener, into the conversation. What do you think? After hearing all this, do you see a viable path forward for Venezuela? Or do the challenges just seem too overwhelming right now? Let us know. Leave a comment. We're genuinely interested if you agree or disagree with our take on this incredibly important and honestly quite tragic situation. And if you want to find more deep dives like this one, where we really try to get under the surface of complex topics using solid information, you should definitely check out Mind Expansion Daily. It's a fantastic resource for staying informed on a huge range of subjects. Really great insights there. And while you're visiting Mind Expansion Daily, please do like and subscribe. That way you won't miss any of our future explorations into the stories and issues that really matter.